Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Garrett Mueller. Garrett is the head coach of Stewartville High School in southeast Minnesota. The son of a Wisconsin Hall of Fame high school coach, he knew at a young age he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. He played his high school football in Wisconsin before moving to the University of Wisconsin Lacrosse to further his career. After graduation, he quickly moved into the teaching and coaching role, spending some time in North Carolina before moving to Stewartsville in 2011. In 2018, he took over the head coaching position, and in the first year the team went 5-4, battling injuries and not having the success that he wanted. The staff made a decision to move to a more sprint-based style of football, eventually moving Coach Mueller into a role as a track Football Consortium contributor. In 2019, the records changed to match the new style of football, going 10-2. A partial COVID year followed, but in the past two seasons, the Tigers went 8-2 and 10-1, moving higher in the state rankings every year. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on, and excited to connect with you here and talk a little bit about what we do, obviously with Stewartville football and with our athletes to find success and continue to grow the sprint-based football and delivering a great experience to all the athletes that we work with.
Well, that's a pretty good lead-in, because that's really where I was going to start. I've watched some of your track Football Consortium videos. I've watched some other podcasts you did. I tried to read as much stuff as I could, and really your program's very interesting. It's really pretty cool on how you're doing things.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start kind of where you started. So one of the principles of Feed the Cat is just happy kids, student athletes as a commodity, actively trying to give the kids the best possible experience and make football the best part of their day. So there's a lot that goes into that. How do you kind of set that up where your kids view football as the best part of their day?
Yeah. So, and that was, I think, when you talk about, setting up a program and what your foundations of your program are going to be and what you're going to emphasize and how you're going to go about delivering that to your players. That wasn't necessarily a question that we were asking ourselves back when I first started, making football the best part of a kid's day and what really the outcomes of that process is. And so once we, got on to kind of the Feed the Cats and Tony's, philosophies and kind of pillars of what that means, we started kind of doing a deeper dive into that because thinking back over my career, even as an assistant, there'd be times where we had conversations as a staff. Oh man, these guys don't seem like they're having fun, or what can we do to make practice more enjoyable, or, it feels like a grind for them. And, we're halfway through the season and they're not interested anymore. And I think that's the biggest thing is when you make that shift and you start to prioritize that experience and what can we do to make it the best part of a kid's day. And they start to really love being a part of our football program. Now they're going to become more passionate about what they do, and they're going to put more energy and effort into what they do. And the product's going to be better, I think, instead of focusing on the end result, the wins and the losses and things like that, and then hoping that everything kind of falls into line to get to that end result, focusing more on that process-driven approach, creating a great experience for your players, and then just letting that scoreboard take care of itself. The things we do, in terms of making football the best part of a kid's day, it goes back to a lot of those Feed the Cats pillars and foundations about, tires of the enemy, not the goal, right? And don't burn the stake, and prioritize performance and practice. We don't do any traditional conditioning. A lot of the things that maybe turn athletes off to football or any other, sport or athletic is, those aren't necessarily the most enjoyable parts. And there's obviously going to be tough things that we have to do to prepare you to be successful. But those tough things become more enjoyable when the experience is made better for the athletes. And so, some of those main things that we, like I said, we focus on, is prioritizing rest and recovery. And we want healthy athletes. And you mentioned, I think, in the intro a little bit about, injured athletes and stuff like that. We're not a big school. And so we need our best guys on the field for us to be successful and to win. And, we've been fortunate enough the last 2 years where the guys that we have starting week 1 are still on the field, in the postseason for us. And we have our best players on the field, able to play and able to contribute. And when you prioritize rest and recovery, and players are feeling good about coming to practice, already that's going to help, I think, improve the experience for them. And then, just the way we structure our practice, we try to incorporate a lot of energy and, things that players enjoy, competition, small-sided games, stuff like that. It's not a lot of monotonous drill work. We try to do things that keep players engaged and try to change that and manipulate that and improve that as the season goes on. If we're doing the same thing week 1 that we're doing in week 10, we can't really expect our players to improve and get better, nor can we expect them to stay engaged and interested and excited about what we're doing. So I think the last piece then is, winning. We do it because we love to compete, and we do it because we love to win. And if Feed the Cats didn't work and didn't win football games, we probably wouldn't do it. But I think we're proof, and there are a lot of other programs out there that are proof that, if you implement this the right way, like I said, that scoreboard and those results take care of themselves. And when you start winning a lot of football games, that just helps increase the engagement and that experience and how much fun the players are having. So it's really, Tony calls it a Feed the Cats feedback loop, where coaches deliberately set up an experience and an environment in practice where players are having fun and enjoying what they do. And then players experience success, and then coaches see that success and get that feedback. And so it drives them to continue to create that positive experience for the players. And so just that positive feedback loop as we go on between players and between coaches allows us to continue to find that success on the way. So it's probably been the best thing that we've done in our program is frame, that creating a great experience for our players and making it the best part of their day. And then a lot of the other stuff is kind of fell into place for us.
All right. I heard you mention this and some other stuff when I was watching it, but getting into the culture of Stewartville High School, it seems like you really understand that kids can forget a lot of things, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel. So that seems to be high on your priority list of how you made the kids feel at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's something that we're explicit with number one, I am with my coaching staff. And we have those discussions with our players, especially at the beginning of the year as we're, kind of developing and setting the tone for our culture for the season. We explicitly tell them, what we're doing. And I think that's important for them to know and for us to put it out there, to speak it into existence, right? Our intention is to make this the best part of your day. And so they know where we're coming from, that we care about them and we want them to have a great experience. So, and then when we talk about how we go about doing that on a daily basis, they're aware and they're familiar with that. And so I think that's really important that you're explicitly talking about that with your players and with your coaches, so that they know what those expectations are. And then, we're holding ourselves to that every single day.
In your culture and what you're working with your coaches and what you're working with your players, that there's two things that I heard you say go into culture. It's what's built and what's tolerated. And at the end of the day, you have what you have because you've either allowed something or you've taught something. So what are you teaching that creates the culture you and your staff want?
I think that's a loaded question, right? And I think over time, I used to be look at that as more black and white, and I think it's become a lot more gray for me over the last couple of years as we've made this transition, right? But ultimately, I still do believe that to be true, that when we talk about developing a culture and developing a program, that culture is going to get built one of two ways, either by default or with intentionality. And so you're going to have a culture, good or bad, and it's going to get created. So you can either decide what you want and figure out how to go about doing that and be intentional with that on a daily basis, or you can kind of step back and kind of let that happen. And it may go the way you want it, it may not. And so in terms of that kind of that taught or tolerated is what I kind of the phrase I used to say. I think I really emphasize that with our culture and our program in terms of setting that up with the players and talking about here's what we're going to do because here's the outcomes that we want to achieve. I don't know if you've heard of either E plus R equals O at all. It's kind of a equation talking about outcomes that you
Hmm.
want to, desired outcomes that you want to achieve. And so you have an event and you have a response, and then that's going to equal some kind of outcome. And the only thing that we can control in that equation is our response. We can't control the event that happens to us. And ultimately, the hard one to swallow is we can't control the outcome. And that's, I think, what especially high school athletes, they want to control the outcome on a Friday night, or they want to control the outcome at the end of their football season. Ultimately, the only thing we can control is our responses on a daily basis to the things that happen, and putting ourselves in a position to hopefully achieve those desired outcomes. But when they don't happen, how are we going about changing those responses? And so we talk a lot about that in our program. Having a disciplined response is the phrase that we use in practice. If a teammate is dogging it, how do you respond to that? In a game, if we're, a team takes the lead on us or scores first, how do we respond to that? If we're up by 2 touchdowns going into the fourth quarter, how do we respond to that? If we lose a football game, how do we respond to that? So there's all these different things that we have an opportunity to choose our response to, and ultimately, number one, is it achieving the desired outcome? If it's not, we got to change our response to get that desired outcome. And it may not happen right away, but if we aren't constantly assessing that and figuring out better ways to respond to those situations, we can't expect to continue to find success. So that's been a really big foundation for kind of for our culture and our success in our program, is talking about that taught or tolerated, but really focusing more on our discipline response to situations, and how we're intentional with those things, and making sure, again, we're trying to get those outcomes. Ironically, it's the individual or the team really that surrenders the outcome or the result, surrenders the results, focuses on the process. That's more likely to actually achieve that desired outcome at the end than the team that's just focused on the outcome and forgets, what do I have to do, making the next best decision, or what's that next step in that process to get to those end results. So our guys have done a really nice job over the past couple of years of, modeling that and living that out every single day. And really proud of the growth that we've seen, I think, because of it.
That would kind of lead into my next question, because the way you do things, everything's measured, ranked, published. Everybody knows everybody's stats. The competition level is very high. So to keep the culture in check and not let that run away and actually break a team apart, I would imagine you have to keep a pretty good idea of where the pulse of the team is.
Yeah, yeah, and that's important. And we actually, so we're meeting. We do in the spring. We have a book club, and so we meet with our seniors, or our rising seniors. So currently they're our juniors, and we just kind of talk about, being leaders and being servant leaders, and kind of having your pulse or your finger on the pulse of the culture. And one thing we talk about with the players is, what kind of peer pressure is there? Is it positive peer pressure to like be at workouts and, and to work hard and push each other to get better? Or is the peer pressure to let guys slack off or take the easy way out, or, not hold people accountable? And so I think that's, the way with the record, rank, publish that we do, and just being intentional with how we set the standard in our program, really pushing each other to get better, right? It's that competition that's going to continue to drive success. And ultimately, we talk a lot about too is, the guy that you gotta fight, that's going to be your biggest opponent, is yourself, right? The person in the mirror that you have to continue to strive to work to improve and be better than. Because we can't control who we're going to line up across from, or how good that player is going to be, or what they're going to do, but we can control our process and preparing ourselves for the next season. And so that's been a big part of what we do too, is just to continue to push, building your own house, we call it, and building that foundation, and what are you doing to weather the storm when it comes. All right, it's easy when it's sunny skies and 70 degrees to do the right thing, but have you built that foundation to weather the storms when they come? So I think that's really important, and guys see that then, the competition that pushes them to improve and get better. within the program, um, against guys that they're competing with right now, and then also ultimately that themselves that they're competing with. That's their biggest opponent. So I think those two things have been a big part of that push for us to continue to drive that motivation, improving, get better. It's hard when you started to climb to and have some success. That's hard. How do you deal with that, right? And it's like you got a target on your back a little bit, and everyone's kind of clawing and scraping to catch up and get behind. And it's always harder, to compete from out in front, I think, than from behind. And we were fortunate to put two successful seasons together back to back, but every year that we move forward, it's going to continue to get harder, and so we're going to have to set that bar higher and find ways individually and then collectively as a whole to get better. So, just really proud of our guys the way that they've handled that up to this point, but something that we continue to stress, I think, because as soon as you don't, then you lose sight of what got you there, that process, right? And all of a sudden now you're the ones in second place trying to catch back up. So it's that constant battle to find ways to stay out in front.
All right, and I'll touch on one more thing on the culture because you mentioned it there in the beginning of that. I mean, I know in my mind what servant leadership is. I know where it's derived from. I have a picture in my mind of what it should look like. But what does that mean for your staff and your team? Where does that all fit in?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. That's something that I think is probably one of the hardest things for a high school athlete to really grasp and live by and model. I think because there's so many things that are pulling them away from that, right? It's a look at me world, right? Especially with social media and recruiting and all that kind of stuff, right? We celebrate the individual, um, but ultimately well, at least for me, football ultimate team sport. So how do we continue to celebrate the individual success, which is important, but at the same time, making sure that we're lifting our program up because, right, no one individual is going to be able to carry a football team necessarily. We need so many different pieces and parts to be successful there. So, for us, when we talk about servant leadership, it's truly asking yourself the question, what have I done to affect positive change in a teammate today? And so that's what I always ask our seniors that question. Like when you step on the practice field on a random Tuesday, what are you doing to affect positive change in your teammates today? And if you're not asking yourself that question, we talked about being intentional with our culture. If you're not intentional with those actions, maybe it's happening, but maybe it's not, right? We don't want to rely on default. We got to be intentional and make sure that's happening. And we're going to have good days and bad days with that. It's not going to be perfect all the time. But for me, I think that's the big thing from a servant leadership standpoint is what am I doing to help my teammates be successful? And then truly as a leader, then understanding what your teammates need in any given moment. I think that's the other piece of it, right? Because you're going to have different relationships with different guys from within the same class, senior to senior versus like senior to sophomore. We got a sophomore that's pulled up to varsity, right? You're gonna lead your senior teammate different than you're gonna maybe lead that sophomore kid who doesn't have much experience, is maybe deer in the headlights and is a little bit more emotionally unstable than the senior is. So I think that's the other important piece with that is knowing what to give your teammates in the moment when they need it. Because they're going to need different things at different times. Sometimes they're going to need a arm around the shoulder and to get lifted up when things didn't go well. Sometimes they're going to need a kick in the ass. It's going to be different at different moments. So I think that's really important from a leadership standpoint is knowing what those teammates need when they need it and just being intentional with affecting that positive change. So those are kind of the two, I guess, big coaching points for me when it comes to servant leadership that we try to instill in our guys. And I'd say that's probably still the biggest area for growth, I think, and always will be in our program because you're graduating a group of seniors, and then you got a new group coming in. So that's always a start over process almost, I feel like, for us every single year is trying to grow that through the off season so that when we, when it comes August, we're stepping on the field ready to go there.
All right, we'll move into a couple more personal things, maybe. Uh,
Sure.
I mean, they're not crazy personal, but I want to know the thought process behind a few things that happened during your career.
Okay.
So, your dad coached at a different high school, and
He did.
you decided not to play for your
Yeah.
dad and to play at your hometown.
Yeah.
How long did that decision take to be made?
It actually, it was not really anything. I think growing up, it was weird. So like, and I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old right now, two boys, and then a little girl who's 3. So she's still, this past fall, she kind of started to understand what football is, I think maybe. But the 10 and the 8-year-old come to practice every day. And so they're part of the program and they know all the players. And, I remember being that age and the only experience I had with football was being around my dad's program. But then I would, be going to school during the day with all my best friends and my buddies, and their experience was going to Menominee High School, is where I'm from in Wisconsin. So they'd be going to the Menominee games, and I'd be going to my dad's games growing up because I got to be ball boy and on the sideline. So I would not trade that experience for anything. But I wasn't necessarily around that program 24/7 because it was about a 45-minute drive for my dad to each day up to Barron, Wisconsin, is where he was the head coach for a majority of his career, at least while I was growing up. Um, and so I guess for me, it was never, we always went to school, in Menominee. My mom was a teacher, in the district and at the schools I went to. Menominee had a ridiculously successful program. Joe Labuda is the longtime head coach there, and he's retired now and a Hall of Fame coach as well. And they won 4 state championships as I was growing up, so it was hard not to be excited about playing in that program as well. And I had a really close connection with my classmates and a talented group of guys. And so I remember, I think it was probably like middle school, I want to say probably 7th, 8th grade, where I had maybe some thoughts about, I could probably go play for my dad, and it's a smaller school, and maybe play more or play sooner and have more opportunities. But, at the same time, would have been really hard, leaving my friends and guys I'd played multiple sports growing up with. So, I guess it wasn't ever, something that I deliberated over too much. Um, but unfortunately then, did not have a shared football experience necessarily with my dad outside of conversations that we had, on Saturday morning about how his game went and how my game went. So that was always kind of a unique, probably, deal than what most father sons have. He probably only got to see me play 4 or 5 football games in my high school career, in the playoffs, if when his team was, maybe had lost and we were still going. And so it was tough, I guess, looking back on it. But in the moment, he handled it amazingly well. And so I never felt uncomfortable or felt bad about that or anything, and I wouldn't change that decision now either. I think looking back on it, it was for the best for both of us, I think.
And the great thing about that was you made it through. It didn't kind of tear you guys apart. And
Nope.
now you have a dream situation. You're coaching with your
Right.
dad. He's helping with the
Yeah.
program.
Yeah. He's been with us for, well, actually, we were joking about that now. It's almost going on 10 years. So when I was an assistant still, he had been retired, and he was actually then when he retired as a head coach, after I was done playing in college. He went to Menominee because we were still living there, so it made sense for him to he was retired from teaching, and then at that point too, and so he helped coach at Menominee because he was close with that staff and knew that staff pretty well, and so he got to coach at Menominee for 4 or 5 years, and he actually got to coach my younger brother. So I know that was something that he really looked forward to and enjoyed, being able to coach him his junior and senior year, I think it was, in high school. So they got to share kind of that experience. And then after my brother graduated and kind of was off to college and stuff, then, and I had established myself in Stewartville, he reached out and was like, "Hey, you think I could come down and help you guys out instead?" And then at that point, my oldest son was born. So him and my mom were both retired, and they were coming down to hang out with grandson one day a week on Fridays. Typically, they would take him and hang out with him. So it just kind of made sense. He was already going to be there. He might as well start helping out. So the rest is kind of history now. And he's been in the program almost 10 years and affectionately known as Coach Pops. Couldn't have two Coach Muellers on staff, would have been too confusing, I think, for the players. So Coach Mueller and Coach Pops, and so the players just love having him around. He brings a ton of energy to practice in his own kind of unique style, and obviously a ton of just experience. And having coached all those years and being a successful coach in his own right, it's great to be able to lean on him, especially situational stuff on Friday nights. And just great to have that shared experience now. We're both on the same page with what we're doing and talking football and part of the same team. So it's been certainly a great way to make up for lost time.
All right, so we'll move into training a little bit.
Okay.
The one thing I really like, and we do it here, we've done it for a long time, is we track everything. It sounds like you guys do the same thing. Anything that's measurable
Yeah.
is tracked.
Well, yeah, and we tell that measuring is just going to drive intent, right? I think that's the biggest thing we noticed right away is the intent of our athletes when we start measuring stuff just goes through the roof. So the more that we can measure, I think the more feedback we're going to get. So we know what's going on. Is this helping? Is it not? And I think the athletes are really getting more out of it then too when we do that.
Everything's kind of looked at on a bell curve. I've heard you mention that. I know other training programs mention that. I mean, you have a part of the bell curve where you're at optimal peak. You're getting the best out of your players. And if you do too much, you go over the bell curve, and now you're starting to get diminishing returns. How do you decide when the returns aren't what
Where
you
that
want?
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So minimum effective dose, we call it, right? So thinking about what do I need, and actually, well, I think traditionally minimum effective dose. I can't remember who it was, if it was like Cal Dietz or somebody, I don't know, but they talked about minimum performance dose, which I really liked, right? What's the minimum dose we need to get to see peak performance, right? We don't want to see just a little bit of an improvement, but what's going to get the best out of that, out of our athletes. And the important thing with that then too is like that varies from athlete to athlete, even, right? It's going to be a little bit different. So really being in tune with those guys and what they're doing. And then when going back to your point with the measuring, like if we're measuring stuff over time, then we know, right? It really helps us individualize some of that program for players, because if numbers are falling off or we're not seeing what we would typically expect out of them, we know there's probably something up there that we need to check out, where if we weren't measuring it, that would probably fly under the radar and we wouldn't catch it. So but going back to like the minimum effective dose, I think traditional coaches and football coaches especially, right, where a lot of us were grinders. I mean, I was that. Like, I was not the biggest, fastest, most athletic kid ever. I had to work hard to even find my way on the field, and I think just coaches naturally that's part of our mentality, and so it's hard to grow out of that or back away from that. Like, we want to, it's the whole more is better, and having to completely blow that that mindset up. And more is not better, more is just more. And so we never want to get to the point where what we do today is going to ruin tomorrow. Because if I kill a kid today and it's Tuesday and we still got 2 workouts yet the rest of this week, I've ruined him for the rest of the week, and he's probably not going to experience any growth or improvement or get better. And now we just lost valuable time that we don't necessarily have a lot of. So for us in our program, that's the number one thing, is we're always going to err on the side of doing too little than we'll ever err on the side of doing too much. When we talk about our sprinting stuff, I constantly have guys that want to run extras, or maybe it didn't go as well that day as they wanted it to. It's like, oh, can I run one more? Can I run one more? And it's going to be when they run that one more, when either the injury is going to occur, or I think the other piece of that is, now if they know that they always get extra tries or more opportunities to do it, then the intentionality and the focus on the reps that they had diminishes. And so they know if they only get 2, they better darn well make sure that those are two really good reps. And so I think when we talk about prioritizing performance and really focusing on being intentional with the work that they do, those two reps can be really, really good ones, and they can get a ton out of that. And that's all they really need. We start to, let them go 3, 4, 5 times. The quality of those reps are just going to continue to go down. And now we're just putting the kid at increased risk of injury or fatigue, or then taken away from the work that we need them to do later on. So I think for so many reasons, that's been a big part of our programming and what we do when we talk about decision making, whether it be for off-season training or in-season practices, all that kind of stuff. We're always going to err on the side of doing too little than too much, because they're not going to get worse by resting, right, or taking or not doing anything. They may not improve, but doing that extra may make them worse. And so I think that's the hard part too. We lose a lot of coaches when we say that rest and recovery is more important than practice. And so when we prioritize that and make sure our programming is done well and correctly, I think then that's where you really see that growth take off, because it's that minimum performance dose or effective dose to elicit those improvements and those gains without detraining the athlete.
Yeah, you're kind of running a balancing act with the CNS system. I mean,
Yeah.
you have a peaking phase where I'm sure you bring them up to a point where, those practices are pretty heavy, probably a predetermined time out of season. And then you go into a tapering phase where you hit more of the rest recovery to be ready for the start of the season. But if you wreck a kid's CNS, it could take weeks to get it back to where he needs to be. So I guess managing the volume of the kids is probably the key component to your success the last few years.
Yeah. And I think that's always volume, I think, is always going to be the number one, or at least in my experience, volume's always been the number one killer of that stuff. It's not necessarily the intensity of what we're doing, but it's the volume. And so just making sure that we're really smart with that piece of it is really important to make sure, that we prioritize that health of those athletes so that they're always in a state of high performance.
And you hit on it a minute ago. I know it gets talked about a lot, max effort, max effort, max effort. Every coach would want to believe that their kids are giving max effort, when in reality that could be the case. It could maybe not be the case. How do you help a kid realize what max, maybe not even max effort, max intent is, so that they know where they're at?
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to your measuring piece, right? Like if we're measuring it or it's something that's measurable, then we have immediate feedback and data to know based on if, we've been doing a good job with tracking that data. Just a one single point in time, without frame of reference or context doesn't necessarily tell us much. But if we have that longitudinal data over time that we can reference back to, that helps drive that programming, and then that feedback for us as coaches and for those athletes to know, am I at least max intent with what I'm doing? Talking about your work to rest ratios are really important, and making sure you have that proper rest before the next bout of exercise, whatever it is, whether it's a sprint or a route, for a receiver in a football practice, a deadlift or a bench, rep in the weight room, whatever it may be. Really, I think educating our athletes about what that rest needs to be, so that the max intent effort can be there when it needs to be. And that's going to be different, right? You mentioned from a CNS standpoint and from a physical physiology standpoint. And that's still, a part. I don't claim to be an expert in that stuff, but in listening to the guys that are the experts, that CNS takes a little bit longer to recover maybe than what most of us realize. I think there are some smart coaches out there that talk about the robustness, right, of a teenager CNS, a 17-year-old versus a late 30-year-old CNS is a little bit different. And I think it probably is more robust and able to recover faster than maybe what we in our program give them credit for, or what they can do. Because like I've seen a kid that can repeat sprint ability when we're doing a fly 10 when I don't think he's had enough rest necessarily. but he hops in there and he runs his rep, and yep, sure enough, he backed up a good time or even got faster. And it's like, I guess he did recover enough. But again, going back to that minimum effective dose, we always want to make sure still that we're erring on the side of caution, and that we're not putting the kid, at risk for injury. So it's certainly a balancing act there, and trying to figure that out. And there's some data out there that talks about, like, from at least a sprint perspective, it's like 1 minute recovery for every 10 yards of sprint distance or something like that. I think Brendan Thompson has mentioned that a little bit, and can't remember where else I've heard that. So we try to subscribe to that a little bit, or something close to that. Like if we're doing a 40-yard dash or a 10-yard fly, just because the buildup is typically 30 or 40 yards, and do a 10-yard fly, we're going with a 4 to 5 minute recovery before they run their next rep. But then again, like I've said, I've seen a kid, repeat the same or even improve after a 2-minute rest. So, again, out of context, just doing that once is probably not a big deal. But if they're repeating that daily over time, that volume again, or stacking, that stress, eventually, you're going to see injury occur. So that's always really important for us, is that we just make sure that we manage that stress correctly, so that as those days stack up over time, it's not getting to the point where eventually, we've gone too far, we burn the stake, or let today ruin tomorrow. So, that's there's so many different rabbit holes, you can go down with that stuff in so many different ways you can look at it, and we're still figuring that process out a little bit for ourselves. But I guess we've done a pretty good job for the most part up to this point, but still learning and growing in that area for sure.
I don't know if you're familiar with Jim Windler. He wrote 531.
Okay. No.
So a lot of programs, and they use his program, and he's the strength and conditioning coach at London, Ohio. He's a power lifter himself. He come through Westside, all the things that go along with that. But you and him are kind of on the same page with this. It's every day is the rung of a ladder, and it's not worth sacrificing one rung to climb two, knowing that you're going to fall back three.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, right? We don't want to try to take one step forward if we know it's going to, put us 2 steps back later on. And that's hard for the players too, because they want that instant gratification, and it's hard to, have the delayed gratification, and knowing, hey, if you do this right over time, and are consistent and stack days, eventually you're going to see that growth. For anyone that's listening to this, if you don't know who Steve Jones is, go listen to everything that he has out there about leadership and culture development, because it's what we, base a lot of our leadership and culture development in. He was a longtime coach in the state of Wisconsin, and won 5 straight state championships and 70+ straight games. And they didn't focus on wins or outcomes. They focused on people, and and doing things the right way. And now I lost my train of thought. But ultimately, when we talk about doing that kind of stuff, it's so important to focus on that process, and not the end results, and worried about getting the times and doing the extra to get there. It's just making sure that you take it one step and one day at a time, and focus on that process to get there. And eventually, that growth's going to come. You just kind of lay that foundation. We water it every single day. And as we talk about, like, pouring ourselves, what do you have to do each and every day to water it, to lay that foundation? So eventually, your body or our team is ready for that growth when it's going to happen. I don't know when it's going to come, but if we don't do a great job consistently every day watering that, you're not gonna see it eventually. So it's just being patient and continuing to work until it happens.
Going back to your weight room a little bit, you guys sprint 2 days a week. You're in the gym,
yep,
lifting 2 days a week. You have your plyometrics, you have your RPR, visualization, everything that goes into building the best kid you can physically and mentally at the same time. Now, when you sprint 2 days a week, you're considering that max effort. Am I correct? I mean, you're considering the volume of how much stress the running is putting on the kids. So you would actually treat that like a weight room day, essentially.
So we try to stack our stress and stack our rest. So, and what I mean by that is we'll always sprint first. I think that's super important, right? From a CNS standpoint, we want to be as fresh as possible when we're doing our speed development. So we're always going to sprint first. And then that's a great primer because it's not a lot of volume, right? The intensity is high, but the volume's low. And so it's just a great primer then, I feel like, for the weight room. So we're going to go out, we'll do our speed drill work for that particular day, whether it's a max velocity focus or an acceleration focus, whatever it may be for that particular day. Do our time sprints, and then we'll immediately go to the weight room for the weight room work that day. And so each session is, or each part of that is 45 minutes or so, give or take. So about 90 minutes is our total time that we work. So we'll do that 3 days a week total. So our 2 sprint days are usually the first and the third day. So however, you might have to set up your schedule. If we're Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, maybe you're Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it may be. Our first and our third day are going to be our sprint days. We're going to put like our agility, change of direction stuff kind of on that day in between. And so that's worked well for us. There's different ways, a lot of different ways to skin a cat, right? And a lot of people find success doing it. We found that works really well for us and for our schedule too, right? That's the other thing, is like, what space do you have, and and what time, how much time do you have, and you got to make do with the best that you got. And so that's kind of where we've been at the last couple of years, and has been a good process for us in our off season.
I'll start getting into some other stuff that I've heard you talk about, and it matches the gym. So it's some common ground we have. Force equals mass times acceleration. The bigger your maximum weights are, the bigger your submax weights are. Now we do a lot of speed weight room stuff. We kind of follow a West Side system. So you got speed box squats, speed bench presses, stuff like that. With the theory being that you cannot lift, let's say, 80% of your max fast enough to equal your max, but you can lift 50% of your max with, let's say, chains or bands or something like that, fast enough to equal your max. So you're building speed and velocity that's going to create force.
Yeah.
You kind of hold to those same principles a little bit in your speed work and carrying over.
100%. Yeah. How fast can you be strong?
Yes.
Right. Is kind of the way I think that you can put it in a high school, right? We got to be able to speak in 16, 17-year-old brain language that they can understand. How fast can you be strong? And that's the other thing is, any of our programming in the weight room too, we want to support our speed development. For us, speed is king. And for a lot of coaches, they'll say strength is king, and that's fine. And those coaches are welcome to do them. And because there's a lot of successful programs that are built on that. We have just found that, I guess, in our experience, again, and in my opinion, our athletes, because of the focus being speed, number one, or what we do in the weight room, not taken away from speed development, and we're constantly focusing on how fast can we be strong, I believe we are able to express our strength on the field better because of that philosophy and the way we set up our training. And at least in recent history, better than the teams that we line up across from than on a Friday night, or at least most of them.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, when we talk about that in the weight room, anything that we do, because we're still building strength then too. So I don't want people, people think that the weight room doesn't matter, or that we don't want to, gain mass, gain size, get stronger. Like, those are all very important components of everything that we do. So we don't neglect the weight room. We simply, maybe have refocused or shifted our emphasis in the weight room. Because body armor in football matters, right? Like, if you're an offense or defensive lineman, mass is a component of that force, right? And so if we can continue to build mass while also increasing the explosiveness and the speed of an athlete, ultimately, we're going to give them those underlying qualities that they need to help make them a better football player. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to be a better football player, because they still got to go do it on the field if they have, crappy technique or tough with decision making or can't remember how to line up well, they can be the fastest, strongest, most explosive kid on our team. They're not going to be a good football player. So they still have to be able to do football specific skills well. But we feel like if we're able to build those underlying physical qualities with our speed work and with the stuff we do in the weight room, we're going to put a kid in a more advantageous position to be successful and be able to express that stuff on the field, like I said. So, we were talking a little bit before we started, we use triphasic training, in our weight room. And so, I guess for us, like if we look at like a 12-week kind of off-season block, winter right now, we have our winter off-season athletes. And so, we kind of go through an eccentric phase into an isometric phase. We're currently in a concentric phase right now. And then we'll eventually transition here the last 2 or 3 weeks into kind of a power and peaking phase, really because most of these guys that we're working with right now have a spring sport they're getting ready for. You got golfers and baseball players and track athletes and stuff. So ultimately we're really trying to get them ready for that spring sport, knowing that the work that they're doing is going to eventually help them, in the fall when they're back with us. I think it's something like 90% of the guys in our program are multi-sport athletes, which we, encourage above all else. So we got to make sure we're training these guys to be successful in everything they do. And we believe that, those qualities and the way we train with the triphasic stuff and then the speed work as well, is going to translate to everything that these guys are doing. Ultimately, we call them, and got it from Tony Holler, but building apex predators, right? Is, run fast, lift heavy, jump high, jump far, are all going to make you better at the sports that you play. I don't, not too many sports out there that wouldn't say that those qualities would help them be better in what they have to do. So, we're always trying to train those things and build those things into our program. And as we go, every year, as I attend a TFC clinic or listen to Chris Corfist or Cal Dietz talk, I realize how much I don't know about that stuff. And as they're awesome because they're so willing to share what they learn and how they apply it with their athletes, that we're able to kind of learn along with them, and take that stuff and do our best to implement it with our athletes, or at least the stuff that is applicable to, our population of athletes that we're working with. They're working with some pretty high level dudes, and so some of that stuff may or may not be appropriate for our population, but I think a lot of it is, and again, in our experience, it's helped our athletes and our program be successful.
You said a few things in there that I kind of wanted to touch on a little bit, and talking about speed, strength, how fast you get there. The one thing that I don't think people take into account is strength is measured in speed, not weight. If you have two guys that are squatting, if you have two guys that are squatting 500 pounds, whoever squats it the fastest is the strongest.
Right. Agreed. 100%.
So getting kids to understand that it's not about the weight on the bar, it's about how fast you can move the weight on the bar, is a key component to building strength and speed. Now, the other thing is, I read Cal Dietz's manual on triphasic. We talked about this a little bit before the show.
Yeah.
I think you would have to sell me on eccentrics. I've listened to a lot of talk about them. I looked at them both ways. I don't know that I'm sold, but it sounds like they're working for you. I almost think it's truly impossible to get true eccentrics trained. Now, I'll get your opinion on this because you're experiencing your day and you're getting it to work it. But let's take the bench press, for example. If you're working on the eccentric part of the bench press and you're coming down slow, well, your antagonistic muscle are your lats. At what point does it cross over, let's say, your triceps, your chest, everything that you're trying to train eccentrically? At what part does it fail and your lats have to take over, and now it becomes a concentric movement for your antagonistic muscle?
Yeah, you're probably even speaking over my head a little bit there. I'll be honest with you. But I think, so when I think about eccentrics and the way Cal, he talks about what kind of narrowing that V, right? So you have your loading phase, and then you have that isometric transition into the concentric explosive phase. And one guy that we had we talked about before we started, but I don't think we mentioned since we kind of started the podcast, was Dan Victor. And he talks a lot about managing collisions, and all of those collisions, you are absorbing the ground, another athlete, a ball in an eccentric fashion, right? You're having to lengthen and prepare the body then to manage that collision and then hopefully transition it into some kind of concentric explosive movement. So whether it's, you know, having to decelerate and change direction, or I'm an offensive tackle and I got a 250-pound defensive end that's trying to take the head off of my quarterback, right? And I have to manage that collision, taking him on in a pass protection block. A lot of different things where we have to absorb that force and be able to stop it and control it. Mm-hmm. And so I think from an eccentric standpoint, it allows us to be strong, or our body to create adaptations to be strong as we absorb that force through a full range of motion, right? Because we talk about kind of that slow eccentric, and there's, you know, you can do extreme ones. You know, we typically live in the 5 to 6 second window with a lot of our eccentrics. And again, we have, you know, 15, 16, 17-year-old developing teenagers. And so we try to keep it as simple as possible, especially with big groups and stuff like that. You know, it's not a small group training session with one coach and stuff. We got, you know, 30 plus kids and one or two coaches in there. And so we're trying to at least give them, you know, the exercises and some of the different things that are going to help elicit those improvements from an adaptation standpoint, so they can go transfer it out to what they do. Yeah, so I guess that's my why behind it, or my argument for it, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and that's great. You know why you're seeing results. By no means did I ever want it to sound like I was questioning your program.
No, that's fine.
It was just nice. It's nice to have discussions with coaches and see what their thought process is.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, right. And it's great to like be challenged on some of that stuff from a person who comes from, right, like has a lot of knowledge about it and has a lot of experience and has had success doing it another way. And I think those are the conversations that we have to have, right? To like that's what I had to blow up my entire, what I thought it took to be, you know, a successful football player, a successful football program. And we've completely flipped that on its head and are finding success a different way. So like, and those are the questions we have to ask, and the conversations we have to have to continue to push and grow and improve and find the best way to do it for us. So no harm done.
No, and it just great conversation all the way around. Yeah. So back to some other things. When you're in the weight room, when you're on the field, when you're running, you're seeing great results. It's very tempting to try to push that just a little further. Just take it a little further. It's everything's going good. How do you maintain the ideology that the goal is the goal? We know we're on track. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Sure. You talking like in a practice, like specifically?
Yeah, when you start seeing everything coming together, you're starting to see your speed time. You know, you're getting faster. You're starting to see kids get stronger in the weight room. It's carrying over to the field, so practice intensity is high. I mean, that's a coach's dream.
Yeah, it is. It's fun. Yeah, you know, and it's fun to hear. Like, you know, we've gotten to the point now where, you know, we have coaches who reach out and, you know, are kind of ask or interested. They see us play, or have whether it's a team we played against or someone, you know, who's watched one of our games and just kind of seen the energy that we play with and the intensity that we play with and stuff like that. And I think it goes back to how did we get here, right? What was the process to get us here? And we were really intentional with that process to achieve the results that we've gotten up to this point. And so to deviate from that means that if we change our response, now that outcome is probably going to change. Now, you know, we didn't win our last football game last year. And so there are some things we're going to have to improve and change to find a way to win our last football game. And so by no means, do I ever want to say we got it figured out? I think there's a lot of good things that we do um, that have led to the success that we've achieved. But for me, it consistently, or constantly goes back to just that refocusing on the process and the responses of the things that we've done up to this point. What have we achieved? Okay, that's not good enough yet. What are some of the things that we need to go back do now to continue to improve and change? So it's just that focus on that process driven results, growth mindset, and continuing to find ways to get better to push that envelope further and achieve things that we haven't achieved yet. And so, we're at a good spot from that standpoint. I think we got a lot of hungry players coming back and hungry coaches that want to continue to improve and get better. So it's that, again, that positive feedback loop again too, where we're feeding off each other and wanting to create good experiences for our players, and we see that and we feel their energy and how much they enjoy it, and we see them improve, and then that drives us to want to continue to find new and better ways to create those continued experiences for our guys to improve and get better. So I think that's the fun. That's the funnest part about it, and continues, I think, to drive my energy and keeps me excited about continuing to do it. It doesn't get dull or old or monotonous or anything, because we're always continuing to find new and better ways to get it done.
All right. Well, I'll hit you with one more question about the weight room, and then we'll move on to something else. So,
Okay.
listening to some of your TFC presentations, I heard you talk about you guys moved to a safety squat bar,
Mm-hmm.
a straight bar. You were seeing some lower back strain, stress issues, so you just moved, and this seems to alleviate that. Now, my question was, what did you do to address the original problem you had with the low back? Did you bring in a GHR, a glute ham developer? Did you bring in a reverse hyper? How do you develop the backside, especially knowing you want to be fast?
I'm lucky to have we have a full-time strength and conditioning coach, or our district invested in one. We partner with a local um, healthcare facility in the Rochester area that has a sports performance department, and they basically we have an exchange program basically where we pay that facility, and they provide a strength and conditioning coordinator for that works exclusively with our district. And that started, I think, it was like my first or second year. I think my first year as a head coach. So I kind of came into having that for the first time. And I was nervous about that because we had a relatively successful strength bar. Like, we were creating strong kids. And so it's like you're bringing on someone new. You don't know where they're going to come from or what their experiences are, their expertise is. And we've been super lucky that the initial guy that we had, and now we've had we had a new guy transition into that about a year ago. Um, uh, Very much on the same page with training philosophies and what we want to do and what we want our outcomes. So I've been fortunate to have a person with a really strong background in strength and conditioning, and went to school for that. And so they brought in their level of expertise with some of that stuff. And so I've really leaned on them in terms of some of that programming to bring in, along with following a lot of the guys that present at TFC, like Cal Dietz and Chris Korfist and Dan Victor. I mentioned him, and Brad Dixon does an outstanding job. So just trying to take reaching out to the people who I feel are the experts, and what have they done to find success with creating healthy athletes and explosive athletes and stuff like that. So our big kind of reasoning, I guess you could say, moving away from a traditional back squat. Yes, we were having some of those maybe low back issues or sort issues and things like that. At the time, we weren't tracking as much data or things like that either. I don't know that I can say it's because of the back squat that was happening. I felt like that was the case. Anecdotally, I kind of felt like that was the case, but there could have been other underlying conditions, issues. What are they doing outside of their time with us that could have led to some of those issues? And ultimately, then also for us, we felt like with a back squat or a power clean, which we don't do either, anymore and haven't for the last 4 years. We felt like there are other exercises that we can elicit similar training adaptations without potentially putting our athletes in a compromised position from a health standpoint. There's nothing wrong with a back squat or a power clean. I grew up doing both of those. I never had any issues with them, and I found success training that way. Um, but I think in a large group setting, when it comes to teaching proper positioning and the correct way to spot and, you know, just doing it to prevent injury, the opportunity cost with having to teach that and then monitor that with those exercises. And then also, I think, in my like non-expertise opinion, um, technique with some of those exercises can be a limiting factor in the weight that they can do or how fast they can do it. Right. So, like, if we find other exercises where it's easier to teach the technique or technique is less of a limiting factor and we can still get the same training adaptations that can, you know, help the athlete be successful on the field, in my opinion, I'd rather choose those exercises because it's less time to teach it. It's safer. Shouldn't say safer, because X squat and a power clean can be very safe, taught correctly, and the athlete performs them correctly. There's nothing wrong with them. But in terms of the time it takes maybe to perfect that technique, we don't have to take the time to teach that now to a kid necessarily. So again, nothing wrong with them, but we've found that we can get the same adaptations with things like a safety bar split squat, where we're putting a player in a more unilateral position, which I think is more sport specific than anyway. Very seldom is a kid in a, you know, shoulder width stance, bilateral, down and up. It's always some kind of offset. And so I think putting the kid in a more sport specific position with that safety bar split squat and then being able to load that up, probably with more weight than what a kid could do on a back squat, and then be able to move that explosively and quickly, like you said, and being strong fast. We choose to do that instead. And then, you know, hex bar deadlift, we do then as well, is kind of our bilateral stuff. But even then recently now, since we've gotten into our isometric phase with our triphasic stuff, we've been doing all of our hex bar stuff with like an offset stance. So even there, we're not necessarily bilateral, like right next to each other. There's a slight offset either way with either foot. Because again, most of your sports that all of our guys play, there's going to be some kind of offset with their feet. So we believe, I guess, there's more transfer when we do that. And just with the hex bar, again, rather than a traditional deadlift, just putting that athlete in a little bit better and more athletic position naturally, I think, because of the way the exercise is set up in our experience. So, and again, for me, who you know, I don't have a CSCS, don't have any, you know, like my background is not necessarily in that. It's physical education. So, I mean, I had classwork and some experience in doing that. And I have all the, you know, the coursework and the clinics and the things I've done over the last couple of years. Just someone who did not necessarily grow up learning how to teach some of the more complicated exercises like a power clean or a back squat. Being able to teach this other stuff to athletes feels more natural, I guess, for me. And again, we've seen really good adaptations and outcomes with it. So for us, that's kind of been the direction that we've gone, and I guess the why behind it.
No, that's great. At the end of the day, you're coaching inside your wheelhouse, and
Right.
that's where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about something a little bit more fun. You know, I've heard you touch base on,
No, it's all good.
but truck stick.
Oh yeah. Great.
It
How
would
fast
take,
can you be strong, right?
yeah, it takes the weight room to the field to some awards the kids can get. How did you develop the idea of truck stick, and then how do you figure out what the numbers are?
About 2 years ago, it was now, like coming off of our COVID season. So we had 2020, it was kind of a blown up year. We only played 5 or 6 games and never really had much of a varsity team on the field and stuff, but still felt like we the season just didn't go well. Especially 2019 was kind of our first year of kind of our feed the cat sprint based football approach, and had an undefeated season, and things went, better than I think any of us could have imagined necessarily. And then almost felt like we took a step back the next year. And it wasn't necessarily, well, everyone experienced COVID, right? So there's just so many things out of your control. And so we tried not to let that discourage us too much in our process and what we were doing, because we really believed that, what we were doing was setting us up for future success. And after that, kind of that first, I guess the 2 years really, with the 2020 COVID season, and starting to really track that speed stuff, you just started to realize, like our big guys on the field are never going to be the fastest kids. They're never going to be at the top of any of our record rank publish. Yet some of these guys are really, really good football players, right? And so what can we do to help continue to motivate these guys? And is there maybe a better metric that we can measure that translates to success on the football field? Because then you also see the guys who are blazing fast, right? But maybe they don't have a great football specific skill for the position that they play, or they're not great decision makers, or don't have a real high football IQ. And for whatever reason, the speed that they have isn't transferring to the field. And I think that's the really important piece with this truck stick before we get too far into it. I've had a couple of coaches reach out recently within just the last few weeks, and they're like, Coach, like I have a kid that just posted a 950 truck stick and he's not a good football player. And so I think they want to believe that the truck stick number is all of a sudden going to like make all your football play. Like if they have a highest truck stick, now they're a great football player. And that's not necessarily the case, right? The truck stick is simply measuring momentum, right? How much momentum can an athlete's body generate based on their body mass and their velocity. And it's simply an underlying physical quality. And I think more than anything else, that having a great truck stick number isn't necessarily going to reveal a great football player. But when you start to look at your best football players, they typically have a pretty good truck stick for their position group relative to what they play. And so because of that, for us, it's, more of a kind of a measuring tool or a stick that we use for our guys, saying, if we can increase these physical qualities, it's going to give you a better opportunity to be a more successful football player. But it's not like a causation thing where because that truck stick got higher, you got better at football. For the reasons I mentioned before, like you still have to, talent is important. Yeah. Having football specific skills for the position you play is important. Being able to have a high football IQ and decision making on the field and being able to execute, like all those things are what wins football games and what makes good football players. If we can increase their truck stick number, those underlying physical qualities, it's simply going to enhance those other things that they have to do on the field. So what we found was when we started, I came across the idea of tracking momentum on it was an article on Simply Faster. And it was the off season between 2020 and 2021. It was like January, February. And as I'm reading, I'm like, this is it. Like, this is what we need to use to start tracking for our athletes, to help kind of level the playing field a little bit. And I hypothesize, I guess you could say a little bit, that it's going to start to reveal who our better players are. And sure enough, as we started to track that through the spring and in the summer going into the 2021 season, that tended to be the case. And so for us, we talked about speed's the priority, but body mass, body armor, and being able to generate as much force as possible and being a powerful athlete ultimately is where you need to live to be a successful football player, right? We're not just like, if it was the track world, right, then it's speed, and mass is not necessarily a good thing. But in football it is. So that truck stick, that momentum, or tracking that momentum, really kind of marries the two, and also help can put I think even some guys on our coaching staff and some of our players felt like over those first two seasons, 2019, 2020, we almost started to like de-emphasize the weight room a little bit, right? And it's like, oh, just speed, speed, speed. Bringing this truck stick component back in really helped re-emphasize that, yes, the weight room is also important. Like we need to be good in there too, on top of the speed development. So it was really a great marriage of the two in building what we call those apex predators who can be strong, fast. And so by, we calculate that truck stick then by taking we do fly 10s in our program. Some teams do 10-meter flies, which is actually easier from a conversion standpoint because you don't have to go from standard to metric. We do. So there's one extra like calculation to figure out if you're doing a 10-yard fly. But for us living in the world of football and everything's measured in yards, I think it makes more sense for our players. They don't know what a meter is necessarily, but they're very familiar with what a yard is. So we do the 10-yard flies, and so we run 10 flies once a week, every week. And so it's something that we're constantly measuring, and we have a ton of data on. And so that's really important too from a longitudinal standpoint and knowing where guys are at. And so we'll take that 10-yard fly time and convert that to miles per hour. And so if you're following along at home, the number 20.45, if you take that and divide it, it's kind of a standard number you can use, and not to get too sciencey or a ton of math, but if you take the number 20.45, divide it by your 10-yard fly time, that's going to give you miles per hour that the player ran over that 10 yards. And that's important to know too. That's technically that's their average speed over the 10 yards, right? It's not their fastest point in time. Quick tangent. I'm excited. We just purchased some GPS technology invest for our program. So we got some Titans. And so those just came. And unfortunately, I live in Minnesota and there's snow on the ground, so I can't like go outside and use them yet. So I'm excited to start using those. But we'll have those on some guys now this summer, and that will be able to calculate their peak velocity at the moment in time. So we'll even get a more accurate, technically, truck stick measurement because it won't be an average over 10 yards. There's their velocity over 10 yards. So back to calculating it. So you get their miles per hour, and then we have to convert that to meters per second. So once you have those miles per hour, the conversion to get to meters per second from miles per hour is dividing that miles per hour time or miles per hour speed by 2.237. And so that'll give you meters per second. And then you simply multiply that meters per second velocity by their body mass in kilograms. So you got to figure that out. And so multiply meters per second by kilograms, and it's going to spit out a number that's measured in Newton seconds. And so that's that truck stick measurement. And the nice part about it, you could use like miles per hour and pounds. It just comes out to like really big numbers. And using the metric measurement for momentum, you're going to be right in that 600 to 1,000. So it's like a nice range of numbers that makes sense, I think, to players and coaches and stuff like that you can relate to a little bit. And now that we've had 2 years of that data, we're able to kind of track that against the success that our players have had on the field. And guys can see that, not every guy that's at the top of that list is an all-conference player or a best player. But this past season, we had 15 all-conference kids. They were all in the top 30 of our truck stick. So, there was, I think, 5 out of our top 10 that were not all conference kids because they're a sophomore offensive lineman that isn't ready to play varsity football yet, but they weigh 255 pounds and they can run 17, 18 miles an hour. So we know that they have really good underlying physical qualities. And if we coach them up right, they're probably going to be pretty good football players down the road. So I think that's the important thing, again, for coaches to know is it's more of a data point to use for here's what this kid's potential could be, right? Because that's what it is. That's what all momentum is. It's how much they can generate. Now, what do we got to do as a coach? What do they have to do as a player to be able to harness that and be able to put it out on the field as a player, into a block, into a tackle, as a ball carrier, you name it, based on the position that they play. So yeah, it's been a fun thing to really start to that's gain some traction and become popular. So it's fun to be able to share that out and have other programs start to implement it and really see a lot of value in it.
Okay, so I'll bring this thing kind of full circle back around before we wrap up. I know it's getting late. We've been talking quite a while, but you're obviously very passionate about your players' health, you know, developing them in the best way you possibly can. So let's kind of finish here with your mindset work. I mean,
Yeah.
I think kids are under more pressure mentally than what we really know. There can be a lot of stuff going on in your house and you don't even know because kids are so bottled up. I think possibly social media creates some of that, the pressures of school, everything that comes in. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you get the best mindset you can get on the field, and then when do you know to pull your players away from the field and just have a more relaxing time with them, whether that be the movies or I've heard you talk about things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
some of the other stuff we do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been really cool for me as a coach and for us as a program. These past 2 seasons, we've been able to bring back from just talking about some of our mindset work that we do with our athletes. We've been able to bring back a former player, one of my all time favorite kids that I had the privilege of coaching. His name's Jordan Johnson, and he was a two-way starter for us, team captain on two of our back-to-back state semifinal teams. One of the best kids we coached, and he went off and he got his degree in sports psychology, and so he was looking to kind of get some like clinic hours and stuff like that, working with sports teams and athletic programs. So, and I had kept in touch with him, and so kind of found out he was looking for an opportunity. I was actually at his wedding, um, and got to talking to him and found out he was looking for opportunities to come work on, some things that he had been doing with his coursework. And I said, hey, like, come down and can we bring you in one day a week and work with our guys? And he loved the idea, and obviously we did because it was something that we were looking for. And so every Monday during the regular season, in at least in 2021, he would come down and work with our program. It was great because I got to take more of a hands-off approach with that and just kind of sit and be a part of it. And it was great to bring someone else who had, number one, obviously a huge connection to our program. He was a guy that our current players, like when they were in fifth and sixth grade, like looked up, like watched, like he was like, oh my, the dude on Friday nights that they got to go watch, and now he's coming back and working with them in our program. So it was awesome to bring, I think, a person who has a passion for what they do and then a level of expertise that I just don't have in that area. And I think that's important too, for coaches being willing to recognize when they maybe have a deficiency in an area and then either go improve that and learn about it so that you can be better at it and have it a part of your program, or be willing to bring someone in who is an expert in this area and can really help your players grow because of it. So he did a lot with our guys from a mindset standpoint, and just talking about he rolled a lot of our discipline response and our E plus R equals O into some of the talks he did, because he wanted to make sure what he talked about with our athletes was within the framework and the context of our program, which was awesome and was really important to me. And then really talked about when recognizing thoughts. Things are going to happen. Thoughts are going to occur and come into your head as you're playing a football game. There's going to be positive thoughts. There's going to be negative thoughts all the time. And it's not so much how those thoughts make you feel or what those thoughts are. There aren't good thoughts. There aren't bad thoughts. It's just a thought. But you have to be willing to notice those things, because if you try to ignore it or put it aside, it's typically not going to go away, and then it's going to detract from your performance. So meeting those thoughts head on, accepting them because they are what they are. You can't change how you feel about something. You can't change the thought that pops into your head, right? You can try, but you're not going to be able to. And then simply just taking that in as information, right? And then releasing it, letting it go, and being able to move on to the next play or use that information um, to help you perform better at whatever it is you need to do. So as a wide receiver, you drop a ball, you get pissed off or mad, you have thoughts, oh, I suck or I can't catch the ball. Like if you focus on that portion of it, you're probably not going to catch the next one either. Instead, focusing on the information that happened, like why did I catch the ball or what happened in that situation, so that I can use that information to help myself improve and move on from it emotionally, so it's not detracting from my performance and what I have to do next. So um, kind of a deep dive there into that, but that has been something now that we've really rolled into our program as well, that we've continued to talk about this year. And Jordan was able to come back as he kind of starts his own practice and his own things. He was not able to come down every week this year, but he was able to get down 3 or 4 times, and we were able to continue to kind of build on the things that we implemented last year. So that was great from a mindset standpoint, like physiology or psychologically in terms of their performance. And then you kind of just mentioned, like, it goes back to that delivering a great experience for our players, right? And so, and making football the best part of our kids' day. And so we're always trying to find ways to grow our culture and our connection between our players and our coaches outside of maybe, the context of football. And so we, are constantly, through our fall camp, we're building in fun competitions to the end of practice. There's a pool in town, so we'll go and do like a water Olympics. One day we go at the end of our regular season before playoffs start. We go and play paintball with all of our guys, and so I think it's ultimately, you had mentioned it, players and coaches alike, we're going to remember, number one, the most how we made each other feel. And so the more opportunities that we can create to have those positive experiences, regardless of it's on the practice field or somewhere else, those connections that we make and those relationships that we build through that is going to be the number one factor in terms of our success. And so that's been, I think a big part of what we do as a program is try not to take ourselves too seriously, try to build in as much fun and connection as we can to build those relationships, because ultimately we're leaning on each other. And we got a lot of love for the guys that we're working with. And Tony has mentioned that in a lot of his presentations, football coaches are oftentimes obsessed with hard and soft, right? Like, you got to be tough, you got to be, or you're soft. And the toughest thing, in my opinion, in the world is love. And you're gonna fight like hell for the things that you love. And so the better connection and relationships we can build between our players, between our coaches, the more enjoyable experience we can create for our players, we know the more they're going to love being a part of our program. And then those guys are going to fight like hell for our program because they love being a part of it. And so that's been a big part of our success, and will continue to be the foundation, I think, for our success moving forward, and something that we'll always put to the forefront in terms of what we're doing to develop our program.
Well, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job. I mean, I know it's getting late. I appreciate you coming on. We were able to work schedules out, and I couldn't be any more excited. The conversation was great. You represent a great program. So thank you very much for taking some time and coming on the show.
You bet. I appreciate you having me, Stephen. And anytime, happy to come on and talk about it, because I think it's such an impactful thing that we do, and how we can impact kids and create positive experiences, and help coaches find ways to do that with their programs. I appreciate you having me on and having this platform, because the more coaches we can reach, the better off we're all going to be. So thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, have a great night.
You too.